Hello and welcome to Chris & Co, the show looking at what affects business in Kent. With me, Chris Price. Joining me this week is Natalie Chapman, the Freight Transport Association's Head of Policy for London and the South East. We're looking at the announcement of the proposed route of the Lower Thames Crossing. The tunnel's due to be built to the east of Gravesend, linking Kent's motorways with the M25 near Upminster. While business has welcomed the decision, it's caused dismay among many residents, as Will James reports.
This will be the new link between Kent and London for millions of travellers. Gravesend will now be connected to Essex via a 2-mile tunnel after Transport Secretary Chris Grayling announced this morning that plans will go ahead. He said alongside easing congestion, the so-called Option C crossing will help the economy and create jobs. But putting it here will affect surrounding Greenbelt villages such as Shorn. Shorn residents are united in their anger against the proposed crossing. Posters protesting Option C can be seen in many windows across the village. People here were eager to air their views.
Who wants to come all the way back down here to do it? And if you look at the roads up there in the mornings for the rush hour traffic, it's going to be astronomical.
I don't feel we're going to benefit from it, the pollution. Also, you know, for the small road structure in the village, it's not going to help at all. But I can see obviously both sides to it, but I just feel it's the wrong location.
To not address the problem where the problem exists at the moment at Dartford is a travesty of justice, and I think in 10-20 years time people are going to say it was a missed opportunity by putting it here.
It's not just residents who are unhappy with the proposal. Gravesham Council have also made their opposition to the Department of Transport's announcement clear.
Gravesham Borough Council is unanimously against this proposal. Obviously the Parish Council is against it, and in fact we oppose both routes. If they've gone for the western route, it's probably the lesser of the two evils, but we're still not happy. It will have a significant impact on the parish and the people in the parish. Depending upon what they do, it will split the parish of Chalk in half, but we haven't seen the final details yet.
The plans will affect Gravesend, but are also likely to have a knock-on effect for the rest of Kent.
What is going to be done to improve the capacity, not just at the Thames, but around the county and the major routes running through the county like the M20 and the M2? Don't forget that Kent is a county where a huge amount of freight traffic comes through the ports of Dover and through the Channel Tunnel.
Estimated to cost more than £4 billion, the controversial river crossing will have implications far beyond North Kent. Will James reporting for KMTV from Shorn.
Okay, Natalie, you heard there obviously a lot of unhappy residents after the announcement of the Lower Thames Crossing. Is the damage that it's going to cause to local communities worth it for the greater good, maybe? Don't it?
Well, I think you always have to feel for people that are directly affected by any new big infrastructure like this. And one of the biggest issues is the fear of uncertainty. At least now there is some certainty about where it is going to go. I think what residents really need is more detail of exactly where the route will go, the mitigation measures that can be put in place as well to try and limit some of the impact on them. And also, I think the government needs to very swiftly, suitably compensate anybody who is directly affected by the new crossing as well.
I mean, do you think that undoubtedly there's always going to be some people upset by you know, a measure like this of this size? Do you think that the kind of compensations that are put forward are ever really going to satisfy people that live in those areas?
Well, the government has compensation schemes, and I guess, you know, people can argue about whether or not it's good enough. I think the important thing is to make sure that decisions are made swiftly, that people are allowed to get on with their lives. If they've got to move home, that they can get on and make those decisions and get their lives together as quickly as possible. I think that's a really crucial thing. And the other thing as well is that there are mitigation measures that the government can also include within the design of the new crossing. So whether that's putting in cut and cover or putting in semi-mature planting to try and minimise the impact from the outset on those local communities.
So why is this crossing so desperately needed and been so called for from organisations like yours?
Well, anyone that uses the existing Dartford crossing on a regular basis will know the issues that we see there virtually every day. There's incidents at Dartford 300 days a year, so pretty much every single day there's a problem. And when the toll plazas were removed and free flow tolling was introduced, that did go some way to help improve congestion, particularly southbound over the bridge. But northbound through the tunnels, there's still regularly queues there, IQ there quite regularly waiting to go through the tunnels. So clearly something needs to be done. So one thing is about additional capacity. So we could have seen more capacity at the Dartford crossing itself. But what we understood from Highways England is that building that new capacity in an already really congested area would have actually meant 5 or 6 years of roadworks hell for motorists already using that crossing. And what, of course, it wouldn't do that the new Lower Thames Crossing does provide is it puts more resilience into the network. So we're providing an alternative route, and that's really important as well. And with that alternative route, we can potentially open up growth opportunities in East Kent, new employment, investment opportunities as well. So we hope that it will really help boost the economy of East Kent.
I mean, the one thing that this did do was split two very close by boroughs of Dartford, which was really against obviously the option by Dartford and Gravesham, which was by and large against the option there. What impact does that have when you're calling for something, but actually you're seeing sort of two local areas sort of almost go to war over something that's really a real big issue for business?
Well, these things are never black and white, and you can always see the arguments from all sorts of different areas. I think for the residents of Dartford, they feel that they've put up with so much already with air quality and congestion problems, and we know when there are problems at the crossing itself, the impact that it has across Dartford town centre and the wider area. And of course, we can understand the concerns of those who are going to see a crossing near where they live, with the new Lower Thames Crossing. Right now, there's a great deal of uncertainty, I guess, for them. There is the certainty that where the crossing is going to go, but the exact routes and the mitigation measures aren't yet determined. So I think you can see it from both sides, exactly that challenge. From the point of view of business, we're suffering the delays and the issues already. It costs about £1 a minute to operate an HGV, so quite quickly the costs of just sitting in congestion very quickly add up. And it's a really, really vital trade route for the UK, one of the most important trade routes in and out of the country. And we need to make sure we've got a 21st century solution to that.
How much does the Freight Transport Association take into account environmental damage when it decides, what options it's going to support? Because undoubtedly the option C route was going to cause the more environmental damage, which a lot of environmentalists came out and said. Does that play a big part when Freight Transport Association decides how it's going to, what route it's going to try and support in this situation like this?
Well, ultimately, we have the discussion with FTA members, and members decide our policy, but that does, of course, form part of that discussion. And when we responded to the government's consultation, we did put that into our response, because if you recall, there were two southern routes that were potentially going to lead into the Lower Thames Crossing. There was the favoured route actually was an eastern route, and we understood that was actually going to have a bigger environmental cause a bigger environmental damage than the western route, which is the one that the government have now decided on. The only challenge with the two was the eastern route. We were going to be able to see a 70-mile-an-hour on-off slip. But with the western route, there were concerns that we could see a bottleneck because it's a much tighter turn. So we hope that in the final plans that Highways England will have managed to engineer that out. And then there are far greater opportunities for all the mitigation measures to be put in place to minimise that environmental impact.
Okay. Aside from residents and politicians in Gravesham, there has been a huge amount of support for the Lower Thames Crossing from politicians and businesses across the county. Josie Hannett reports on its effect for the nation.
The decision to build the Lower Thames Crossing east of Gravesend sparked a huge debate when it was announced, but those behind the plans insist it's the right decision for our county and the UK. It's hoped the £4.4 billion tunnel linking Kent and Essex will improve traffic flow on and around the Dartford crossing. Though there's been criticism from residents and politicians in Gravesham, Transport Secretary Chris Grayling says in the long run, option C was the best idea.
I think there are issues in Kent, links from Dover, issues elsewhere in the county that are going to have to be addressed in the years ahead. There will have to be further road improvements in Kent before the second crossing opens. I'm very committed to that. What we recognise is that Kent has particular pressures because of the route through to the Channel, and we've got to recognise that in future planning.
We're delighted. This is a £4.4 billion tunnel. It's going to do great things for the UK economy. It connects the region much better with the Channel ports, so we're absolutely delighted.
Construction of the tunnel isn't expected to be complete for another decade, but at least with the decision to take forward option C, years of frustration and uncertainty has finally been put to bed. This is Josie Hannett for KMTV.
Okay, so Natalie, the crossing has been really supported by ministers, highways, business alike, but it's not expected for another 10 years. Now, freight traffic is predicted to grow by something like 40% by 2030. The government predicts that. So there's going to be a hell of a lot more traffic going to the Port of Dover, Eurotunnel. Are Kent's roads going to be able to cope in the intervening time until this crossing actually comes into being?
Well, this is a challenge. In a way, the new crossing, the new capacity can't come too soon. But of course, these big infrastructure projects take a long time in the planning. And it's important that it's planned right, that we plan it for the future, so that we don't have to then sort of start digging the roads up again and widening it and making it and amending it. So making sure we get it right from the beginning is important. And the other thing is the way in which Highways England works is in kind of 5-year spending periods. And the important thing about getting this decision was so we could get it into the next one, which runs from 2020 to 2025. So now the decision has been made. We hope to see that new crossing up and running within that end of that spending period.
How long will this crossing satisfy that level of growth that's been predicted? It's not just in the freight industry, but in general traffic. How long do you think this crossing is going to, meet the needs of the nation?
Well, I think what's important is not just the crossing itself, but it's all the roads connecting to it, and importantly, the M2A2 corridor. So the M20 is a really good, solid corridor, but the M2A2 is going to become, I suppose, the favoured route when you get onto the Lower Thames Crossing, until, of course, you get onto the A2 and get further down towards Dover and it turns into single carriageway and you realise actually this is in great need of upgrade. So we want to make sure that the government also puts into its plans, its long-term planning, upgrades along that entire route as well. So we've got 2 really strong transport corridors in the county.
Sure. Aside from the A2 widening that you've mentioned, are there any other key areas of the transport network that need to be improved to make sure traffic flows at the right level?
One of the other things that we need to do is also look about how traffic can move between the M20 and the A2, and of course we've got some very large hills there, which is not easy to get trucks up them, so that's something else we need to consider. And we also need to think sort of over the river in Essex, where it's joining onto the M25. It's already quite busy part of the network. There have been talks about perhaps long term whether it could link further up with the M11 in Essex and actually mean that traffic coming into the Port of Dover that's headed for the Midlands doesn't even have to go anywhere near the M25.
In the earlier piece, we heard a lot about residents who are unhappy because of the changes that were made to their community. We've got ministers saying that this is a national project, really, not just a project in Kent that's going to have huge sweeping effects. Do people in general, when these kind of events come along, need to think of the greater good, the greater benefit for the economy, for business, when these kind of huge transport infrastructure projects come along?
Well, of course, we're in a challenge now where we've got to make sure that our economy is competitive as possible and our infrastructure is as solid as possible for when we leave the European Union. And actually, you're absolutely right, Chris, because this isn't just a bit of road down here in Kent. Actually, it has huge importance to the whole of the UK. If you look at the import and export routes, actually it's the West Midlands, the east of England, Scotland even exporting fresh fish and live shellfish as well. It's a really, really important route. So we need to make sure that we are supporting the wider UK economy, but we also, of course, have to think about the impact that it has locally and making sure that those mitigation measures, as far as possible, are put in place too, so we can minimise the impact on people's lives and, of course, on the environment as well.
Sure. Natalie, thanks very much for your insights there on the Lower Thames Crossing. But as we've got you here, a member of the Freight Transport Association, we want to talk to you about one of the other big issues facing motorists and the freight industries, which is the rising cost of fuel. In April 2016, we've got a graphic here which shows the average prices for petrol were £1.05 and diesel was £1.06. Now petrol costs £1.17 and diesel is £1.20, a rise of 11% and 13% respectively. So is the freight industry, Natalie, in a position to weather rising costs like that?
It's one of the biggest costs for any transport operation is the cost of fuel. And also you've got to remember that freight companies work on very, very tight margins, 1% and 2%. So actually fluctuations in fuel prices can have a big impact on the bottom line for businesses. We were really pleased in the last budget that fuel duty was frozen again for about the 7th year in a row. And so that has had a big impact. Of course, we would like to see a cut in fuel duty, which will help businesses to invest in newer vehicles and cleaner technology. But we also need to remember, of course, even with fuel duty frozen, we still pay one of the highest levels of fuel duty across Europe. And we need to be as competitive as possible with our European counterparts.
Fair enough. I mean, we've got another graphic here, actually, which shows that we have a movement. We've seen a movement in the price of Brent crude, which is used to make fuel. Over the last year, its prices have risen from around $46 a barrel to $55. That's a rise of about 20% with, as you can see, lots of fluctuations in between. Now, if the price of crude oil is rising by that level, is it not fair that fuel prices have to rise, at a similar sort of level?
Well, eventually they are all added on. I mean, fuel is bought in bulk in advance, so eventually we do see that all filter through to the prices that we pay. And the other thing we've got to remember is that fuel, it's not just about the petrol we put in our cars, but it's the impact it has on everything that we buy. So the cost of fuel within the manufacturing process, but also within transportation of goods. So if the cost of transporting goods goes up, it means that everything we buy in the shops also goes up as well in price.
Is there anything that can realistically be done to limit potential rises in the price of fuel, other than attacking the government for sort of giving us high taxes? Is there anything else that can be done?
It's a real challenge, and I think we have to remember we are still paying one of those the highest levels of fuel duty within the European Union and within the world, in fact. So I think we are quite rightly continuing to look to government to say we need to have a level playing field here. We need to be looking at the levels of duty that are being charged, and we've also got to remember that we pay tax on tax, so we pay VAT on the whole amount, and that includes the duty as well. So if fuel duty goes up, we pay more VAT on top of all of it. So it quickly kind of adds to the cost of filling up your car, of buying things in the shops, of running our daily lives.
And is the freight industry looking forward to or nervous about the UK's impending exit from the European Union, which has obviously put a lot of pressure on inflation? Prices have gone up. Does the freight industry have a plan for how it's going to tackle some of those challenges that are coming forward?
The freight industry has lots of plans. We're working intently on this issue. Yes, there are challenges, but we also see that there are opportunities as well. And it's important that we make sure that the UK economy is in the strongest position that we can be in for when we do exit the EU. There are practical issues around sort of border controls and around the sort of processes of whether or not we may have to pay tariffs on goods. So making sure we get a good trade deal is important, and also managing that whole kind of customs process. And particularly here in Kent, we have such a high volume of freight going through the Channel ports. We need to make sure that there's nothing put in place that will hinder the kind of fluidity of traffic moving through.
Sure. Natalie, thank you very much for coming in and giving us your insight on the Lower Thames Crossing and also on the impact of rising fuel prices. But that's it for the latest edition of Chris & Co, our show looking at the issues affecting business in Kent. You can keep up to date with all the county's latest business news at kentbusiness.co.uk, our website, and with our print product, Kent Business, which comes out once a month in our Kent Messenger series newspapers. You can also follow us on Twitter at Kent Business and join our pages on Facebook and LinkedIn. But from Natalie Chapman from the Freight Transport Association and from myself, thanks very much for watching. Have a very good day. Bye-bye.